Okay, so 15 minutes in, we're starting the recording. For those who are joining us late, we are talking about the social currency metric system becoming a program. And I just shared the history of how Biturgia and Chaos got started and relate to each other, and that Biturgia donated all of the intellectual property on Grimoire Lab to the Linux Foundation, and that the community that Biturgia started to build around community metrics and the Grimoire cons have transitioned into the chaos community and the chaos cons. So that's when we realized we didn't record. Welcome back. So today, Biturgia is doing its own thing with its customers. The contributing to the Grimoire Lab code base, still the maintainers are Biturgia employees, but we are responding to community requests. One of the new data sources that got added in the last half year was a community contribution. So it's not something that we developed for our customers. It's something that someone in the community wanted and needed. But we're working through the GitHub workflow, and when it comes to managing the community, Biturgia no longer has any control over it. It's all done through the governing board and negotiations or collaborations within the committees and work groups. In terms of customers, Chaos is important for us as a magnet. This is where we hear about people's needs, and we can then reach out outside of the community and talk with people saying, hey, would you like to talk more with us about this? So that's something that is very valuable for us, but there's no agreement between the community and the company that you must forward any requests or anything like that. It's all organic. In terms of what Biturgia, it's not like offers to Chaos. We're just a part of the community. So when the funding is needed, the community reaches out to Biturgia as to other companies about, hey, would you like to sponsor CHAOSScon? Things like that. And then we're just part of the community, like Red Hat, like OpenStack, like any of the other organizations. So I hope that helps to think about how Chaos relates with other companies and how that is beneficial for the company and for the community.
Yeah, and as I've been thinking over the course of the past week about this, the limitations to Socially Constructed is that, one, it is a startup and it is only 2 people. And 2, with the integration of the SCMS, the SCMS being a base for our organization, but not everything that we do. We're a full stack marketing company. We work in community management. And the SCMS is just a base level of what we do. There's an identity crisis there between the technology, air quotes, strong air quotes on the SCMS, the technology, and what we do as a company. So the question becomes, where is the line in the sand between how we participate regarding the SCMS and at what point we start providing services that fall outside of that scope. And that's probably our job to delineate. It's probably our job to set. And it also has to provide that business value. So hearing about how that works for Biturgia and talking about the differences between Biturgia and Socially Constructed, I think it's relatively easy for me to say the scale of socially constructed's involvement has to be scaled back because there's only 2 people involved and the SCMS is only a small portion of the company. So it's really, really difficult for Dylan and I to manage the amount of time involved. As participants, we should be allowed to spend as much time as we want on CHAOSS, but it can't impede the actions of the business. And that's kind of, I think, where Bitergia can probably inform what that relationship looks like. Yeah, does that help?
Yeah, one of the things that we have done is we are not selling Grimoire Lab, or we are not, well, yes, the technology, the way that we provide services uses Grimoire Lab. When I talk with customers, I'm talking about the Bitergia Analytics platform or the Bitergia Analytics service. So I say under the hood, it's the open source Grimoire Lab technology. But in talking with customers, I only talk about the Bitergia Analytics platform. And making that language clear, just having it rebranded, really helps draw that line, because then I say, well, if you want that feature, you can go to the Grimoire Lab project and do it. If you want us to develop a feature and implement it, then you contract us for the Bitergia Analytics platform. And maybe that helps. Maybe if we call it something different, that it helps just language-wise to make that distinction. And then with regards to how much time to spend, one concern that I have for moving the social currency metric system into a program is that it needs to be maintained. Just like Bitergia maintains Grimoire Lab, just like Sean maintains Augur. And right now, the experts on maintaining it would be you and Dylan. So that is a concern I have, that we need to somehow navigate.
And being relatively new to the internal workings, it always appeared to me at a distance like the complex metric. And then as we went through the summer and got into data artifacts and software artifacts and sort of a custom thing for every single group, it started to sound less like a metric and more like some kind of program. And so I don't think I have a full understanding of the constituent parts, even though I've read through the material. Like, it sounds like there's a pretty heavy dependency on somebody providing a service around this for this to be useful. Am I reading that wrong?
So the social currency metric system is a system that we built to make a cultural process in a company streamlined, more efficient, more concrete, more accurate in the day-to-day, week-to-week process. So there is a system involved, and then there is a process and a cultural element to it that has to be installed into a company.
So I would call that a socio-technical system. I would say that it's not just information like a metric or a definition. It's not just software like Bitergia or Augur.
Correct. And
it's at the scale of CHAOSS. It involves people and structure and process, and it sounds more similar to like what Daniel at Bitergia is really well known for, which is helping inner source projects. Where, there's some things that are not public and open source, and Daniel's able to facilitate that connection between business people who want to know things and all of the technology required to do that.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, and that's also Socially Constructed's business model. Right? We provide the system. It's free. It's open source. You can go do it, but as a service, we will install it in a company for you. And after installing it in that company, you can also pay us to maintain it. With CHAOSS, that's going to be different, obviously, because it is an open source community as opposed to being a proper brand client.
Yeah, I mean, do you think there's enough that will be developed under the program and the repository that somebody can go to the project or the repo or whatever it's stored in and get like if they ran it and followed a README, could they produce something, or is there going to be will it be pieces missing? Like, in other words, does it stand on, like, I suppose the discrete metric, the atomic metric definitions that I proposed in my pull request, those will certainly stand on their own. But does the entire SCMS, can it exist as a part of a repository, or a repository that I can run? Is there enough description and enough examples that anybody could run it, or does it really require a consulting effort to run it?
So the plan is that people could just take it and run with it. That's the expectation. That's the plan. And ultimately, I think it's up to Elizabeth and Maria as far as CHAOSS-specific documentation goes, how that looks and where that goes. We'll help write it. We'll help develop it. But ultimately, where it sits for CHAOSS, we'd be looking for your guidance to figure that out.
So
yeah, where it sits can be anywhere. My question's more, I've encountered a number of projects that are just missing things as I've gone through the internet, particularly in my experience is mostly trying to make SSO open source projects work, and there's just always one piece that's not fully developed, or you need one other service. And I just, I think the program or the repository or however we store it, I mean, one measure for me is it stands alone. And I think that still allows Socially Constructed to make money, because just because your nerd can install it doesn't mean they understand anything about all of the influencing techniques that you are experts in, right? Like, I can put on a nerd demo. I mean, the standard is, if someone can put on a nerd demo, then that can excite people. And business people are quickly going to realize, yeah, that nerd demo is good, but it's not good enough. So if we're really serious about this, we're going to engage a consulting firm.
And so I think moving the SCMS into a program, we would go through the exercise of making sure that we have all the documentation, that someone could pick it up themselves, just like anyone can install GrimoireLab themselves. And we're improving the documentation and installation instructions when questions come up, because we want people to use it without Bitergia's help. Because we've had customers come to us say, oh, we've been running this in our basement for the last 3 years. We just don't want to maintain it anymore. Here, we'll just pay you. And we start running it for them and updating, maintaining it, and helping them.
Right.
Just a small comment. We were talking about how SCMS contains a part of manual work in it also, because it involves training, like understanding of all the social terms. Then it involves a codex building, which is actually applying all those definitions as per your understanding of the community. And the third thing would be tagging the data appropriately according to the codex. So those 3 things, I'm not sure if a person would be able to read from a documentation and understand that could be something which Vinaya could explain, that we could, just write documentation and explain it clearly what those terms are, and how can a person build a codex from scratch without knowing anything about social currencies. And ultimately it would also involve maintaining by weekly tagging it. So
Oh.
once a person, like, I think a person can build the system and on get set it running on his own, but ultimately it would involve some part of manual labor which the other person would have to do for having the SCMS running on a system.
That makes sense.
So we have had it on the docket for a long time. And I think that maybe this might solve the problem. We were going to build an e-learning system that allows for longer term training over time, and essentially provide that as like a mid-level between consultation and actually just grabbing the system off of our site and running with it. If we were to do that e-learning setup, we would have to splinter that content. So we would have a 8-hour e-learning that would be splintered to pull specific things and make a simpler version that would be about an hour to 2 hours of learning. And we would provide the hour to 2 hours of learning for free just out there to make the system viable for people to just take it and run with it. This has been on our docket for quite some time now, and we just haven't had the time to do it between clients and CHAOSS and RIA's project, etc. So it might be helpful and viable if we do the 1 to 2 hour recording first and include in that everything that you would need in order to just take the system and run with it. And we could have CHAOSS as a very clear example of the implementation. So maybe we could hit 2 birds with 1 stone there. We could use that system as a documentation tactic for CHAOSS as well.
I like the idea. Now we are getting into specific work packages for moving the SCMS into a program, which at some point we need to
that
talk
support
about.
Anyway. So it's kind of like just documentation, except that the documentation is involved in explaining the sociocultural elements of the program.
Yeah. What I was thinking is, before we get into the specific of what needs to happen to create the program, we were talking about just the relationship between the company and the community and the role of us as individuals. And I want to make sure that we have that conversation concluded before we move on to actually doing the work of moving the program, and then figuring out how we want to structure that work. That would be the next step if we want to move forward.
Yeah.
I am absolutely open to opinions or setups or lines in the sand from CHAOSS. And it seems like there have already been quite a few established, which is good.
Yeah, I don't think it's complicated. It has to be transparently open source. And that means that and they can be sort of examples, right? So nobody puts their employee database in their repository, and nobody puts their customer database in a public open source repository. That would be stupid. And that's the kind of data ultimately that the system might work with. So we need a working example. in the repository so that someone can figure out how to use it on their own if they're so inclined, so that it's not inextricable from the consulting services that are no doubt required for a corporation to actually make use of this. Does that make, Elizabeth, am I making myself, is that clear? Like, I'm trying to keep it simple.
Yeah, you are. And I think that's, I completely agree with you 100,000%, that it has to stand alone and it has to be something that can be replicated easily and installed relatively easily. And I think that the CHAOSS project itself could be that example, because honestly, like all the data we're crunching is just public data, like Twitter and the mailing list and IRC. So it's not like it's any kind of like secret information. It's all publicly scraped. So, I mean, we don't have to put everything out there. We don't have to put everything in the repo as an example, but, you know, just pick and choose, I guess, of what we, you know, things that we considered important to pay attention to, for as an example to others of things that they might want to pay attention to. But yes, I 1000% agree with you. And I think that, yeah, CHAOSS can be that example.
And so in creating that example, documenting it, documenting the program, all that, we need to figure out a cadence of work and how we coordinate that work. One proposal would be to continue working in the value working group, just like the D&I badging system came out of the D&I working group, and continues to be advanced there, just with some side channel conversations and advancing the documentation and process and everything, that we just continue working in the value working group on SCMS. And because that's where the knowledge sits in CHAOSS about SCMS. But for that to work, Vinya, it would be good if you and Dylan could make those meetings occasionally. Otherwise, I would suggest that we find a different time to meet. And it doesn't have to be every week, it can be every other week. And we can mostly work through issues and Word documents and whatnot.
The value working group is already every other week, right?
It's every other week, yeah.
So the reason why I struggle a lot to make those groups and also the weekly session is because it's 2 hours too late. So by that time, I'm already in the nitty-gritty working on client work and Keystone Symposia. And by and large, especially on Thursdays, my manager for Keystone Symposia really, really likes to set up our appointments right on that time, because he's just finishing his management meeting and I have to prioritize that higher. So it's very, very difficult for me to attend, but that doesn't mean that you have to switch the meeting in any way, shape, or form. I think that just setting the precedent that I need to be going over meeting minutes and maybe watch those recordings regularly would be a good idea. And having a separate meeting, like this meeting works fine. It used to be our meeting with Ria in the first place, would also be helpful, but I also know that some people aren't able to attend. So I guess what I'm saying is having a new meeting that informs the value working group, but is earlier in the day on either a Thursday or a Friday would be helpful. And probably something that other people could attend. So we would probably just want to start a scheduling doodle for that.
Mm-hmm.
You could also maybe do more async communication, like maybe set up a separate mailing list or value mailing list, or use the repos more. So it's, you know, a little bit easier for people who can't make meetings for whatever reason to contribute. Because I'm sure it's hard for Ria to attend as well, just because of timing and things. So I mean, that's just an idea, but I'm a huge fan of async communication, like 100,000%, a huge fan of that. And I like when it's also out in the open and not necessarily like someone has to go through a recording to see what happened. They can just read it or get the notification. Like, you know, when it happens. So I don't know, just a thought.
I am inclined to agree with that. I guess the important question is, what does that look like? I don't know if that falls out of the scope of the conversation that we were having, but I think we more or less moved on.
Yeah, no, I think that is
Yeah.
exactly the conversation we need to have right now about how we want to continue working in the future to move this forward. I think we have agreement on everything else, and I think we've worked through the struggles. At least I don't think we still have any concerns before we move into doing the work. So we try to keep Fridays meetings free.
Yeah, to the extent that's possible, it is
Yeah.
certainly a preference.
So we could have something like a once a month Thursday early meeting just to sync up and talk about the progress. And then maybe we start a, so for badging, I know they started with a repository and to do work in the repository, and now we have a Google Season of Docs mentee who is building out the documentation in Gitbook, and we have a license for Gitbooks for CHAOSS. That doesn't cost us anything.
I like
So,
free.
Yeah, for like free. So if we want to, I don't know where the SCMS program will sit, but I imagine it will be mostly documentation. So maybe we do want to build it out in Gitbooks and have a repository that it's mirrored to, so we can have both the pull request model and direct engagement through Gitbooks.
I really like that idea personally. And then it's more uniform of what we're doing in other places. So I like that a lot.
I would just need to be familiar with Gitbooks because I've never used it before. But other than that,
I'm in the same boat. Yet another language for writing things I need to learn, but such is life.
Yeah, I am too. I've never.
I really wish GitHub just had an API setup that would just Google Doc, turn it into document. That'd be really handy.
Yeah.
So Gitbook is almost like that. You put the markdown in the Git repository, and Gitbook just shows it pretty. But if you go to Gitbook and you edit the text there, it automatically creates a commit to GitHub that updates the markdown.
Handy.
So it's almost what you're talking about.
It sounds like it solved a problem in a very complex way. But it does work.
I can show you, if you want to see what it currently looks like, I'm happy to show you a little bit.
Can we make sure that we've covered the other topics and then maybe do that at the end of the meeting?
Yes.
Is that okay? Cool. So one of the other big questions Sean brought up, I think it was Sean. It was Sean or Elizabeth, one of the two. We were talking about the fact that as a service, the SCMS has not been compiled far enough for someone to just take it and run with it. Ria's built the documentation for how it works technologically and stuff like that. Obviously, we'd be putting all of that onto Gitbooks, it sounds like, but you would require Dylan and I, we'd be pretty instrumental in making sure that that stuff works. We do have another option. I have more or less recorded all of the trainings that I've put Ria and Elizabeth through, and we will have to go through and scrub all of that content in the first place. So it's entirely possible that we could just provide those recordings in the interim. It's not perfect, but it is faster and more available, and they are already extant assets. We would just need to scrub them to make sure that it's available for public consumption.
I think the main concern, like documentation not being up to snuff, is kind of, it always starts out not that great and slowly develops. I think my greater concern is there's some data that I think needs to be open, and some computational models, like machine learning models. So like this fully worked example, so that I can just run it and see what it does.
That has
That's
not
what
been
I'm,
built yet.
yeah, and but I think that's where I think Elizabeth and I were saying, you know, the CHAOSS community would be a great place to build that. And I think if you've done, it sounds like you've done a bunch of coding. I don't know what organization that you did the coding for.
So all of the SCMS implementations were all working within the systems that had already been developed for the people that we were working with prior to CHAOSS. So the only people that have really integrated AI-related developments for the SCMS already had the means to do so. One example is Comcast. So we did a SCMS implementation of Comcast call service representatives, and they had a net promoter score system called Medallia. And Medallia had the ability to take in all of this information, and then it just kind of ran its own thing on the back end. So Comcast is basically like, no, yeah, we can upscale this. It'll be totally fine. So they handled all of that. Same thing with MaxQDA. MaxQDA basically has it by default in the first place. It's a more rudimentary version that's specifically used for academic coding, but it was used. And we didn't really have a part in building that so much as just saying, hey, cool, it's there. Let's put it on. And that's what we did. For CHAOSS, our involvement in building that system, I presume, would be a lot more front and center, where we'd actually like get to say, all right, how is this going to work? And we would actually build an implementation that works for CHAOSS's implementation.
So,
Okay.
Sean, the AI is an optional addition that the SCMS does not require. So you can totally do the SCMS and you don't need any technology besides a spreadsheet.
Okay.
So
I'd have to
what
go
you
back to
need
that.
is that codex.
Mhm.
And we started defining that in the metric, and we'll define it. We have it more refined with
Yeah.
Elizabeth and Ria.
Okay.
And then it's all about the process.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
At its simplest, it's literally just a structured spreadsheet system that uses a codex that defines your terms, and a system that imports all your data, and then you go through and tag it based off of your terms. In its more complex states, like what we can see in Medallia or MaxQDA or in RIA's implementation, we now have the ability to import more data or create more dimensions or cater to more tags in your codex or definitions in your codex.
Right.
So at its simplest, it's a spreadsheet. At its most complex, it could be a supervised week-to-week AI, whatever you want it to be, but the heart of the system is still going to be that coding process. And if a human is not in control of that coding process, you're not really listening so much as automating your social listening, which falls into the exact same problem that most other social listening tools like Meltwater are falling into in the first place.
So it needs to be, I mean, I hear what you're saying. It's a supervised process, and people need to continuously refine the supervision of the model, or else it's pretty useless.
So I just want to bring up something that Georg had mentioned earlier about the rebranding of it, because I think that's really an interesting concept and might help draw the lines, as he mentioned. What if we rebranded the SCMS that is going to be available through our metrics system to something completely different, and it would be just that bare bones kind of easy, open but manual process, no automation, no nothing really, except for pulling in the streams. What if we took that and rebranded it to something different that would live in CHAOSS, and it would be separate from the system that Venya has, and that is more extensible and does require a little more hand-holding and implementation?
Like, so that would be, I mean, so as a program, do it that way. Is that what you're saying?
Yes. Yes. So it would be something that is more defined as a CHAOSS metric, a CHAOSS program. I mean, and that would be separate from the socially constructed version of SCMS. And then if Venya and Dylan want to build out that system more for them and their clients, great. And if they want to contribute some of that back to the open source version, also great. If they don't, that's up to them. They can do whatever they want with that side of it.
From our end, at least, the rebrand doesn't seem necessary. Like, I don't particularly care if you're using the social currency metric system branding, and I'm more than happy with you using that. If CHAOSS finds a use case that suggests it should be rebranded, I'm fine with that, as long as where it came from doesn't disappear in that. One of the more important tenets, and I know I said this a lot when I first joined CHAOSS, like the SCMS is standing on the shoulders of giants. It's not new in any way, shape, or form. It's just a simplification of social science principles that makes it possible to use in the day-to-day. So I'm fine with rebranding. I'm not entirely sure it's necessary from socially constructed's perspective. Like we don't have any problems with you using the SCMS system. You could call it that, you can call it an orange. If you're still using it, it's still there, right? Does that help? So
yeah, I mean, I guess the reason I confess I don't fully understand the reason behind the rebranding.
The rebranding is what I was saying earlier with what Bitergia does, because the Bitergia Analytics platform includes maintenance, includes updates, includes support, includes consultancy, and it's different from Grimoire Lab, which is just the technology that you can deploy by yourself. And so when I sell the Grimoire Lab technology, I'm not selling Grimoire Lab, I'm selling the whole service suite. And so it has a different name.
Right.
That makes sense.
And so if Venya, if you and Dylan are selling full stack marketing, that's already a different name to begin with. And then the social currency metric system just happens to be a method, a technology within your service.
Yeah. So
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense then.
yeah. I don't particularly mind either way. I just, from a socially constructed perspective, use the SCMS logo. Like that's going to do nothing but help us. So.
Yeah.
If there is a logo and we make it part of CHAOSS, the trademark should probably go over to the CHAOSS project and the Linux Foundation, just so that we are above board on trademark property rights and all
Yeah.
that.
We could do a trademark licensure if that's something you want to do.
I don't know how it
I don't
works. I
know.
just know that the Linux Foundation is very much likes to make sure that there is no infringement and that the community doesn't get into trouble because it uses someone
Well,
else's trademark
here's what we'll
inappropriately.
say.
If it's published in the CHAOSS repo, I don't think we have those concerns.
Yeah. I mean, it's published, but it's with us attached. So like, our trademark hasn't really changed in any way, shape, or form. And I would say if it becomes a problem, if the Linux Foundation is like, we need this documentation, we'll move forward with it. But until it becomes a problem, I don't see why not just use it.
Are there, I guess I'm again trying to keep track here. Are there trademarked items in the GitHub repo?
To my knowledge, no. The SCMS itself, like the social currency metric system, that language is what we at Socially Constructed do use, and it is a trademark set, but we're involved in the project. So there's no reason why there should be infringement, right? And to be honest, we really only do that for purposes of business sanctity in the first place. Like I really don't care. I don't think there's ever going to be a time when I used trademark infringement law, like ever.
Yeah.
I don't really see the purpose or the point. We just did it as a sake of lawyers saying cover your butts, and we did.
Yeah.
So you actually registered that as a trademark?
The specific social currency metric system we spent $300 on.
I didn't know that. Interesting.
Yeah, it's $300. It didn't matter.
And the trademark applies to marketing, presumably.
Yes, that's correct. So we don't really care if anyone uses it. We don't really care what happens to it or anything like that. But in order to concretely merge it as one of our assets, it was recommended.
So, I mean, basically, we're an open source software health and sustainability project, and our application of the SCMS for open source software health and sustainability assessment or information sharing or development, that actually would not infringe on a marketing trademark for SCMS.
I'm not a lawyer. I would have no idea. But
As I understand trademark law, like trademarks are usually granted for very, very specific like areas of business. And so like I can't like universally trademark food or even CHAOSS. I don't think we could create a universal trademark for CHAOSS.
Well, you could. I think you would just be trademarking the logo.
Sure.
Which
sure.
is what happened in our case. Like,
yeah, and if it's just I mean, so I guess, I mean, I don't know. I mean, this sounds like something we ought to just sort of run by the Linux Foundation people. Just to make sure that we aren't stepping in poo, but I don't see it as a problem based on my limited knowledge of trademark laws. I mean, I've gotten a few trademarks in my day, and how they get defined is pretty narrow.
Well, I mean, when we submitted the stuff, it was like maybe 3 pages, and all of those 3 pages were basically us saying, yeah, we're operating under this name. Cool, great, moving on.
Yeah.
I don't ever foresee using it in that way. So if we want to check, that's totally fine. But I had always considered it a non-issue.
Yeah, I think it probably is.
Yeah, I agree. We should at least mention it to the Linux Foundation, say, hey, we're having this conversation. Do you want to jump in? Is there anything to be concerned about? If they just say no, then we're fine. We are at the top of the hour.
I think I have another meeting, and so does Elizabeth.
Yeah, I have another meeting as well. So I will I'll take the action item of setting up the Git book and the repository. And then I'll send out a doodle to find a time that we can sync in the mornings of Thursday. Is that right? Does it have to be Thursday, or can it be any day, Vinya?
I don't really care what day, as long as it's not 11 o'clock.
You have a preferred time, then I'll put that in the doodle.
8 p.m. would be nice because that's before the 9 a.m. setup, but I also understand that that's a bit early for people, so I'm also fine with 9 a.m.
I can do 9 I can do 8 a.m. I can just not on Wednesdays.
This is Mountain Time, right, Vinya?
Yes.
So that would be 9 a.m. Central.
Depends on the day of the week if I have another CHAOSS meeting or not.
I'll send out a doodle to ask whether Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday works better for people at 8 a.m. Mountain.
All right.
Okay.
Just let
Thank
me
Thanks,
know.
everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Vinya, you want to say something?
Let me know if you have any other questions or anything like that about other stuff like trademark stuff or services or where a C.O is going to sit. But I think we have some well-established lines here. I think this works well for me.
Do you have any link or any documentation for the trademark that I can forward to the Linux Foundation?
Yes. I don't know where. I'm a bad business owner. I'm sorry.
No worries. I do need to go to my other meeting. So thank you very much.
Cool.
And we can follow up via email.
All right. Sounds good.
Okay.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.